We're back here on the program, and we are talking about the 150th anniversary of Trinity Methodist Church with Reverend Bill Higgs, the pastor of the church and one of our foremost theologians in the country, along with three of the ladies of Trinity, Genevieve Brown Richards, Virginia Hall Campbell, these hyphenated names, and Eleanor Campbell. But we were talking about perception, and we're going to engage the ladies in a short while. How were you able to get more integration into Trinity? Because most of the people there in the early 50s, 60s are white Bahamians. How were you able to get
most churches
a mixture now?
In the Bahamas back then were sort of in one camp or the other.
Yes.
Most of the Baptist churches were totally black.
Right.
You know, the Brethren churches were the sort of
Mulattoes.
bright ones.
Yes.
Right. So everybody had its distinguishing features because we came out of those times in our history, the colonialization and the whole movement toward majority rule, segregation, and understanding of tolerance. So that took some time. I take no credit for what happened in Trinity.
For the desegregation.
This started long before my time.
The desegregation of Trinity started long before you?
Oh, yes, yes. Let me say that I was told that there were black families at Trinity all along from the very beginning. So what was different was that they didn't seem to have much influence or a great degree of involvement in the leadership. That has changed dramatically. But for example, the late E.P. Roberts, after whom the school is named, Enoch Pedro and Gladys Roberts, they came to Trinity all their life. When they moved in from Abaco to Nassau, they lived in Pigtail Alley, right behind Graycliff, opposite Government House. And Trinity was the closest Methodist church, so Mr. Roberts said, we can go to Trinity. And all his children grew up there. Now you know those. You know
right.
Sylvia married Oscar Johnson,
right.
and how many parliamentarians have been produced out of that family. And Dorothy, who married Mr. Wisdom, and Neville, their son, is now a member of Trinity. He had come back. Rosemary, who married DeCosta Williams, moved to Wesley to St. Michael's. Yes. But Patrick, the youngest son, Dr. Patrick Roberts, is still there.
Yes.
And a trustee of Trinity. Yes. But what I'm saying, that family has been there for generations.
Right.
Now, got married and moved out and went in other directions, but it's not that he suddenly showed up last week. There's been decades and decades of that family.
You know, the first time I came to Trinity was to Walter Wisdom's funeral. Because I worked at ZNS, and he was general manager at ZNS. And when he passed away, his funeral service was at Trinity. And so I was, you know, staring around and a little agog at what I was saying in Trinity because of the mixed congregation.
So what happened was, I think more and more as social conditions changed, the church reflected those changes. It's not that something mysterious happened within Trinity. It was augmented and helped by certain factors that among leadership you had, for example, up until the 1970s, all British ministers. And then in the 70s we had ministers from the Caribbean area. So they had their first black minister in the early 1970s.
The church...
and that brought a face to the change that was happening.
The church back then did not preach against the segregation that was taking place in the society. It didn't preach about racism way back then. We're talking...
40s, 50s?
Yes.
Yeah.
It almost encouraged segregation, didn't it?
In some ways, perhaps. But while there may not be a lot of recollection of loud proclamations. A lot of work was being done within the church in the relationships. People like the Reverend Makepeace, William Makepeace, who worked in Andros for a number of years. The people there to today will testify of his great love for everybody and how he worked to bring all the people together across the races, across the economic conditions, didn't matter. People like Reverend R.P. Dyer, who fought hard with not only the Methodist authorities, but with the national authorities to get Queens College to be an integrated school. And a number of things that were happening. Some of our politicians perhaps weren't as vocal as they ought to have been, but you could say that for both sides. But I think the Methodists were not, I would agree with you, were not in the forefront of a movement that every picture of the Burma Road riot, everything you see a Methodist in it. I'm not sure, but I don't think it's fair to say that the Methodists were upholding segregation, but a lot of what was happening was sort of under the surface and more quiet, and in the relationship building.
Now,
so my wife is black, and we married 37 years ago,
yes,
which was not totally unusual, but it wasn't the norm. So maybe in some sense, going into Trinity, a white Bahamian minister, but with a wife who's black, assists this process. But it didn't really bring a major change because the change was already there.
But there was no overt criticism of that.
Oh, no. Well, as Lauren would tell anybody, if you have a problem with that, it's your problem.
She would.
Yes, yes.
But no, because we go as a team. Wherever we minister as a
Yes.
team.
Okay.
And so, you know, there was an open and acceptance. I mean, prior to coming to Trinity, I pastored in Spanish Wells, which is another place that has a reputation of
Yes.
being all white and used to
Yes.
have to make all the black people leave before dark,
Yes.
even all the laborers, you know. My father was from Spanish Wells. He, as an adult, moved to Nassau, went to government high school, studied in Canada, was an out island commissioner for many years, worked in Long Island, in Andros, in Eleuthera. So even as children, we were moving around. We had this experience that was took us out of that insular environment.
But you,
So I go back there as an adult, as a minister with a black wife, and you would expect, from all that we've heard, that there would be a lot of opposition. No, everybody welcomed both of us.
But you're a highly educated, highly enlightened man. And so I wonder the extent to which you were involved in an uphill battle to change this socio cultural problems that you had within the church.
I don't know there was a real battle. Actually, I was born in Harbor Island. I moved when I was about 3 with my parents. My father was transferred as commissioner of Governor's Harbor. We lived in Cupid's Key. It was my experience in primary school that I most remember of building friendships and working with people, and there was really no recognition of any difference. It wasn't until I came to Nassau to go to high school that for the first time in my life, at age 11 plus, I realized people look at people differently.
And this is at QC?
Yeah. Even though it was integrated, and I was in a class with at least half or more blacks, but there was still that feeling. This was in the late 60s, 66. There was still that feel, a year before the election that won the majority rule.
Yes.
So, you know, a lot of tension going on. But I don't think it was, for me, a real battle. It was just a learning experience and a sudden awareness that, oh, people do treat people differently.
But how didn't you?
My whole childhood experience was absent of any of that recognition or racism or divide.
But as a Methodist minister, didn't you have the task of disabusing people of this notion or this mentality of racism or segregation?
Well, I never took that on as a task. What I took on is that I should live the way Christ calls me to live. And so by an example, I will show people what it means to welcome, to embrace, to engage everyone based on who they are, not how they look, not where they come from, not what language they speak, not what shade hair they have, or whether it's straight or curly. So I never had an agenda as such to say I have to convert people or make them this or that. My agenda has always been, because I accepted Christ at age 13, so from an early teenager, struggling through some stuff myself, but my agenda has always been, let what Jesus would like to see happen in me, and then through me we can influence other people. And that's simply it. That's my commitment.
Very good, very good. Now, ladies, you all didn't witness or experience racism or segregation in Trinity, right?
No, I didn't.
Because you joined late.
No, but I joined in 1990.
Well, I was 16 when I joined.
Okay.
So I'm not going to give the years, but, you know, it was in that era.
Were you welcomed in the choir?
I didn't want to be in the choir at that time.
Why?
Because I didn't feel like I wanted to sing. You know, but I'm sure if the opportunity, you know, would have been there if I wanted to. But
What year was this that you joined Trinity?
well, before I went off to college, so we're talking about the 60s.
The 60s? Now, I'm sure you felt some pangs of something with all of these white Bahamians in Trinity Methodist Church.
No, to be honest, I have
All these rich white people in Trinity Methodist Church in the 60s?
Never intimidated, okay? Never felt at, no, definitely not. No, I have to speak the truth, okay?
Okay.
I didn't. I mean, I knew there were a lot of white people in church.
But you were in the
okay?
minority, weren't you?
Yeah, well, definitely back then,
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
But my mother, I joined because of my mother, because I came really, most persons think that I'm a Baptist, okay? Because of my uncle being the late Reverend Dr. H.W. Brown.
Okay.
Yes, okay? Everybody, friend-wise, thinks that I'm a Baptist. But I always tell people I followed behind, my father was a Baptist, but I always followed behind my mother, and she was a Methodist. Her mother was a Methodist. She joined Trinity because of her mother.
I see.
I joined Trinity because of my mother, and there it is, you know. But I'm not saying that, no, that there were not a lot of white people inside Trinity when I was a teenager.
But did you feel any racial tension at all?
I'm saying that I did not, and I have to admit that. I did not.
Wow.
Okay?
I find that amazing.
Mr. Jones, when I joined Trinity in 1992, like Jenny, I followed my sister Nadine Bannaby.
Yes, I know Nadine extremely well.
So when I joined Trinity, I can always remember the first Sunday when I joined Trinity, because I guess I was intimidated, like, you know, coming from Wesley Methodist Church, you know, all black church, and going into Trinity. The first Sunday that I went there, I was met at the door by Mr. Philip Brown, and I'll never forget it. Wonderful. He said to me, "Good morning, my dear, welcome to Trinity." And I'll always remember his warm blue eyes, and that was a welcome to me. And when I got there, I was invited to join the choir. And then, you know, my sister Nadine left to go to Abaco, so I was there by myself.
But you're from Abaco, so you've been used to this kind of treatment in Abaco, right?
No, we're not used to that kind of treatment in Abaco, because I grew up in Abaco. I'm from Marshall, Abaco.
Right.
We worked together with the whites in Abaco.
Right, so you didn't have a problem?
I didn't have a problem. No, I did not have a problem. So when I came to Trinity, you know, it was a different culture, because coming from West, like I said. But also, when I joined the choir, and I'll never forget this, Mr. Jones, I think it was when Gary Roberts passed, and we had the funeral. There were only 2 blacks in the choir. When like the politicians, they came to church and they saw us, they said, like, they look at up in the choir, only 2 black persons. But now if you look at the choir, it's the opposite. There's more blacks than whites now in the choir.
I remember Gary Roberts, he was the choir master one time, right?
Yes.
And sang extremely well, a very good baritone. Yes. Now, Mrs. Hall Campbell, you didn't experience none of this.
I don't have that experience.
Yeah, now how you got in Trinity?
I was passing by the church one day, and I saw the poster outside, and it said, "Members expected, strangers, visitors welcome." And I thought to myself, wow, what an interesting caption there. And so I decided to visit the church, and I went in the following Sunday. I was very well received. I loved what was taking place, the order of service. I was really intrigued by Reverend Bill's sermon. I always am, because I think he's always well prepared, and it resonates with me. And I kept going, and I learned a bit more about the order of service and the entire being the Methodism, and I felt that this is what I was looking for, and I joined it, and I have not had any experiences which said that I made a mistake.
I'm sure.
Being there.
Well, you know, I'm not saying this because he's here, but if you listen to his sermons,
Yes.
you must be very,
He's
as
a
you say,
man of God.
intrigued, and
Yes.
you learn all the time, eh?
Right, all the time. He's always well prepared, well researched, and it always speaks to you from a practical aspect, so that you can take what you hear and truly apply the principles in your daily living. And it really gives you a source of comfort to know that you can just go and sit on Sunday mornings and for a half an hour just be taught. And really, really, really well prepared, and I enjoy that.
Is the church growing?
Yes, it is.
You sure?
Yes,
Oh,
Mr.
yes.
Jones.
When I first came there one Sunday morning, it was a little scanty.
But you know, Mr. Jones, the numbers really don't tell the whole story
Right.
about Trinity.
Okay.
Very often you may come in and you may not see a great number of people, but I remember Reverend Higgs saying a few weeks ago, because one of the activities celebrating the 150th anniversary was, we run a very well prepared and well respected soup kitchen ministry.
Right.
And one Sunday, one of the programs was dedicated to our soup kitchen recipients. And if you would come to church that Sunday, I mean, the church was packed. And the next Sunday, of course, it was not as many persons.